I've just been thinking about ambiguous images. I came to thinking about that through, well, actually through a consideration of the use of writing within visual artworks, but I haven't really got very far with that yet. But what it led me on to is to think about certain ambiguous images and what's happening when I look at those images. And it's pretty much a subjective response, so I'm not sure how much credibility these thoughts have. But there is something fascinating about those images. And the ones I'm thinking of are, well, the famous duck rabbit that Wittgenstein talks about, which looks like a rabbit's head if you look at it one way. But if you look at it another way, it looks like a duck's head, and what will the ears of the rabbit become the bill of the duck. So I'm thinking about that one, and I'm also thinking about another ambiguous image in which, if you look at it one way, it looks like a young woman kind of looking coquettishly over her shoulder. And if you look at it in a different way, and I'm going to have to go back to this phrase "in a different way" in a minute. If you look at this image in a different way, it looks like an elderly woman with like a fur collared coat on, perhaps. And with both those images, and I think of the last one particularly here, the woman. Once you kind of get it, sometimes it's quite difficult to. Sometimes you kind of lock onto one of the images and it's quite difficult to see the other one. But once you've got the idea of both of them, if you kind of relax, you can just kind of toggle between them. It just happens spontaneously, a little bit like Necker cubes. And the impression they give just kind of toggles between the possibilities spontaneously without you actively participating in that choice, apparently. But you can also do it consciously. You can, look at this image of these two women and see it as this young woman looking over her shoulder, and then by what appears to be an act of conscious will, you can change it so you're seeing the elderly woman. It's often presented as my fiancée and my mother-in-law. That's kind of how it's usually captioned. But I'm just wondering what this thing is, that this process by which it happens through an act, apparently through an act of will. What's going on with that? Certainly, what I find in this image of the two women, less so in the image of the duck rabbit, although I think it applies there too. Certainly, the image of the two women is that I can make it change from one to the other more easily, if I place my attention on a particular part of the picture. So if I look at the squiggle in the picture that represents the eye of the young woman, then it appears very easily as that young woman. And if I want to change it to the older woman, I can consciously focus my attention on the squiggle that represents the eye in that case, and that will kind of initiate the change. So the act of will isn't really about trying to see the woman. Oh, it kind of is, but it has a procedure, and the procedure, for me at least, is this focusing upon a particular part of the image. I think there's some interesting things about that. I mean, certainly, two things about that I find potentially interesting. The first thing is an observation of myself, and again, I don't know how much validity this has. It might be a purely subjective experience. But certainly one of the experiences I have with that is that when I do this, consciously allowing the image to flip by placing my visual attention on the part of the image which is the eye, it's not just the direction of my gaze that's changing. I can kind of feel in myself a whole kind of repertoire, a whole choreography of changes taking place in myself, which is supporting this change of the focus of my visual attention. It's almost as I can feel myself shifting in my chair and repositioning myself to orient towards this other possible appearance. And here I guess I'm reminded of Merleau-Ponty's idea of maximum grip. What he talks about in there is that we all have this kind of inbuilt, completely somatic, completely unconscious set of behaviours whereby when we're confronted with an image or when we're confronted with an experience or an event or an object, we completely intuitively place ourselves in a particular relationship to it. I think he gives the example of walking into an art gallery. Without being told, you know where to stand in relation to the artwork. You know that it's the painting on the wall, you stand at a certain distance from it, and at a kind of 90-degree angle to the wall on which the painting is mounted. You don't need to be told that, you just know, because it gives you what Merleau-Ponty says is maximum grip on that object. And it's interesting he uses a tactile metaphor there. It's picking up. So just to continue that idea of maximum grip, it could be what's happening there in terms of my flipping these images on these ambiguous pictures, so the young woman turns into the older woman. It feels like what's happening is that my body's striving to obtain a position of maximum grip in relation to the secondary image, driven by my focusing the visual attention on the eye of that image. So the eye is kind of the attractor, or maybe I'll talk about that, and then the rest of my body follows that pattern, and the image, appears apparently magically out of that relationship, the relationship between my posturing, even if it's very subtle, including the gaze of my eyes, and the kind of image I would expect to see at that point. And as I say, if I want to flip it back from the old woman to the young woman, again I can look at the eye, I feel my body shifting to obtain maximum grip on that picture, and there's the picture appears very quickly actually. I should just qualify this, but this is the second thing I just want to talk about really, which I can't say an awful lot about, which is this idea of the attractor, which is something Paul Stockwell writes about in Cognitive Poetics. I think he's written about it elsewhere as well, but it crops up in Cognitive Poetics. And he's talking about attractors not in the visual images, he's talking about it in writing, particularly in poetry, and how certain features that appear within poems, which might appear at the level of actual words, or might appear as kind of literary figurations. These things have the effect of attracting the attention and guiding the attention through the writing. And those attractors have a kind of embodied logic to them, and a set of hierarchies almost, that certain things will tend to attract our attention more than others. And that attention may not be entirely conscious. The act is kind of guiding landmarks or kind of emotional signals for how the journey through the pieces is tended to be made. So I think just in terms of that logic, and it's early days in my reading of that particular stuff, to the extent the same thing might apply within visual images, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. When I'm doing this little dance around these ambiguous images, what seems to be happening is that a part of that image, the eye for example, seems to be acting as an attractor, and I think there's a good evolutionary reason why that be the case. And then the rest of my body is jumping into line behind that. Some dogs here, I've got to put my dogs on all